To order. Susie, roll call, please.
So would you like us to do the pledge?
No,
Okay.
special meeting,
Okay.
special circumstance.
You're special.
So we
Councilmember Groves.
Here.
Councilmember Chambers.
here.
Councilmember Salzweedl.
Here.
Councilmember Barkus.
Here.
And Mayor DeVore.
Here. Approval of the special meeting agenda.
I'll make that motion.
I'll support.
Discussion and changes. Sue?
Councilmember Groves.
Yes.
Councilmember Chambers.
Yes.
Councilmember Salzweedl.
Yes.
Councilmember Barkus.
Yes.
And Mayor DeVore.
Yes. Public comment. Moving on. Washington Street project, Mike.
So want to address this in three different steps for tonight. The first one will be is we'll present the bids. Brandon can go over the bid summary with you as to what the recommendation is going to be. We did get approval from USDA to move ahead with the bidder, but I'll explain that in a minute. And then from there, Warren Kramer from MCFI, he was supposed to be here tonight but couldn't make it in, so he's on Zoom. He's going to go over your rate analysis with you. And then if you want any questions for him, you're more than welcome. And then I did provide a number of supporting data in your packet. If you want to go over those, we can. And then lastly, Jessica's here. She has all the bond resolutions and ordinances, which you would need to consider. And then once you're done with all that, I think you can take action on everything if you so choose. So the first thing I'm going to start with is I'm going to have Brandon go over the bids with you, and we'll go from there.
All right, I'm not sure if there's a visual, if what
I
we
can
had
put it-
sent
I can put it up.
in our bid award recommendation letter and tabulated in bid tab. We only had two bidders. We were hoping for more. We were hoping the project bid a little bit earlier, but the two bidders we had were very close, very competitive, and the low bidder was 4% below our engineer's estimate. So that's, in my opinion, that's a perfect place to be for an engineer, is to be second low. So we were right, so the prices came in right where we expected. And for Monroe, going back to, we had a really nice bid for that. So the low bidder was from a company called Georgetown Construction. So they have a good reputation. Steve Crane, who's kind of running that outfit, I've known him since his Millbacker days 20-some years ago. So and they've done some recent projects both here in the city and for some other Williams Works projects, and done a great job. So we think they'll do a very good job with this.
They did the Grindle and Shepherd project, and I had no issues with them during the project. So
But they weren't the paving contractors, but the paving was.
that's a little different.
Yeah, that was different, right, so I just wanted to make that.
That was
I
your-
was
yeah,
just
right.
gonna ask
Yeah.
if they were
Yeah.
recording.
Yep.
So they kind of, they kind of helped. A lot of times paving contractors, if there's a lot of paving on a job, they might end up being a general, but they're not used to being a general. We saw this on our Eastern project, where, K&R actually was kind of the general and doing all the other work, but Michigan Paving was just putting down tons and tons and tons of asphalt, so they had the biggest part of the project. If there's any specific questions, we went through tabulated bid. Nothing really jumped out at me in terms of, you kind of see how, these are pretty interesting if you want to take a look and see how different contractors, bid different items. But, it all came down pretty close. I believe we found one small error in Dean's Landscaping and made a correction on that, which amounted to $10, on $3.6 million bid for them. So I always find this interesting. We always do this after a bid opening, and I mean, oftentimes we have more than just two bidders, but. And the separation of the water, sewer, and lead service allowance dollars are also provided on the front page of a recommendation letter.
Just so you're aware, as part of this project, we had to have $58,000 come out of our funds for commitment on the water end, $147,000 on the sewer end. So I have cleared it with USDA. Our commitment on the water end can go towards the lead line removal, where we've already in our water budget, we did budget $50,000 this year for lead line removal, but we don't need to touch that money. We can use our commitment money for the lead line removal on the water end. So that's more than what we have for the allowance. So hopefully we don't have that much, but we have funds available if an issue comes up.
So those of you that on the council maybe that do not know, the USDA dollars, the federal dollars cannot be used outside of the right-of-way limit, so it's right-of-way to right-of-way or easement to easement, if that be the case. Some of the state dollars that are being given out through the SRF program, other programs, those can be used specifically for lead service replacement. They can pay for it from the main right into the house. But with USDA dollars, they have to stop the right-of-way, but that's where local dollars can be used to go from the right-of-way into the house.
Brandon, I'm just curious, the total length of the streets are the same, but this is quite a bit less than Monroe. Is it apples to apples, or why is this?
There's less storm work on this job, I believe is the primary reason for that. So it was pretty close though, I think, on these big places.
Pricing was pretty close for this
close.
one. I want to say it was what, 3.8 maybe?
Yeah, this came in a little bit less, but there was a little bit less utility work. I think there was a little less curb to be removed. There wasn't as much sidewalk.
There was less of a water, there was less water
Yeah, less
cost.
water certainly too, yep.
Okay,
So-
well, it is new storm lines, water lines
Yeah.
for,
Right,
okay.
if something is being left, like whether it's curb or a little bit of storm here and there, we're moving certainly what we need to put water main in. You know, the standards Eagle has for water separation from storm and sanitary is different than it was when these lines went in many years ago. So sometimes we had to make adjustments there. We've evaluated utilities, and if we discover something that we think needs to be replaced that isn't being replaced, we'll do that. But certainly the sewer, the water, all that, and most of the storm is being replaced.
Yeah, Michigan's putting on the gas mains down through,
Yeah,
right?
I believe
They were
so.
at my house today.
Yep.
We showed them where the sanitary cleanout was, so.
And we're replacing the line's a 4-inch now in Washington, it's going to be 8-inch water.
So I'll have water pressure.
What is happening, I didn't really see it broke down, what is happening on the side streets as far as water lines? I mean, a few weeks ago, we talked about Avery Street project, and because it was going to be open, and it's now our standard to go ahead and make necessary repairs to those side streets if we're going to open it and remove it. So none of that is included in this.
There was not a need to replace the lines on any of these side streets. We looked at that when we did the soft grant. The issues were on Main and Washington. Other than, there were some cross streets where we did address it in the last project. We addressed it at King and at Kent.
Right.
Those were the only areas of concern. What you approved a few weeks ago was pertaining to lead line. Well, the water line on Avery, that's totally different. That's
Right.
totally different. But
Okay.
in this circumstance, what you approved a few weeks ago also was the investigation of lead lines. So depending on funds, we have 20 years to replace the lead lines, but, you know, depending on how this goes, we may be able to replace them during this project when the project comes up. Otherwise, we may have to kick it down the road. It just depends on funds. But there is no need for the water, any utility replacement on the cross streets. The streets there will be a secondary bid later this spring for the cross streets in Lafayette on the north side of Main Street. So we'll probably do that work in the fall in conjunction with this. We've moved everything on the south side of Main Street to next fiscal year. And then the Avery, that's a separate project.
Yes, I understood that.
So,
The other thing is on line item 9, it's even though it's only $500, the stump round 19-inch to 36-inch. When I drove down Washington, there's a total of 7-8 trees that are currently in the right-of-way. What is the objective of this? Are they going to be removed?
there's only one tree that's going to be removed.
Okay, one tree that's currently in the
Right.
right-of-way.
And we'll ask the property owner if they want to replace it. If not, we'll just make a donation to the tree farm.
So everything, all the others is the same.
Right. As a general rule, we try not to remove trees. I mean, it costs in the trees, some of these large trees are irreplaceable. Sometimes these trees are half rotten in the middle, but
Right,
that's
I
not the
understand,
case,
yeah.
not the case, so.
So,
Which I think we found some of them trees rotted in the middle when we did Monroe. They were hollow in the middle, and eventually they would have came down either in the roadway or have been on somebody walking down the sidewalk. So
If something has to be removed, then of course we will remove it, but
I just looked at it 19, there's not a tree there that I think is a 19-inch in the right of way, so I was kind of concerned, wondering why there's a 19 to 36 inch. I did not see a tree that big in circumference in the right
I
of way.
can't tell you exactly what house number that's in front of her.
I couldn't tell you either. I just know there's one
Yeah,
that is set for removal.
you can see one contractor thought that was $350, the other one thought it was $500 to do that.
Do you have any other questions about, we'll approve everything at the end if you want to take action, but are there any more questions for Brandon and about the project?
I haven't had to go through a list like this since we had the construction company, so thank you.
You're welcome.
It all came flooding back to me and why I got out of that industry.
Yeah, there's only 78 items on this one. I've done some road projects in other
Yeah.
communities where there's been like 140 different items and things like that too. But then you get into really the fittings and some really particular stuff, different types of curb, concrete pavements and things like that too, which we don't have in this project. But contractors are used to bidding jobs this way, so MDOT sets up jobs as well. So, and it's easier to track the progress and the payment schedules. We can go right to, this becomes the schedule of values for us and our inspectors. We'll confirm quantities being placed.
I had one question for Mike, and I should have asked this earlier, but of the total amount, the 3.3 million, how much of that is being funded from the USDA loan? Or
All
how
but
much-
56,000 on the water end and 144,000 on the wastewater end.
Everything else is getting?
Everything will be funded through USDA. And we'll talk about that, but the interest rate on that loan is 2.875%. And Warren, what are interest rates going on in the bond market right now?
Well, Mike, I think, USDA is currently a 40-year amortization period.
It is.
Yes.
I think if we were looking at a 25-year amortization period, it would be about 4.5.
And probably about at least $1 million more total to the project, correct?
Easy.
And that bond can be repaid back early.
Right.
Yeah, with no penalty.
And your annual amortization, once you get some of the, we'll talk about that, but as this goes, you do have the potential down, I would say 10, 15 years down the road to start making some significant payments for that. Your principal and interest payments they're very low compared to what you would have for a normal financing for this amount of money. So, and you're not paying a lot of interest. I've talked to bankers about this. It's almost like you're getting free money and compared to what you're getting on the open market. So,
Mike,
the USDA is the way to go by far.
does this tap us out of the USDA future? Just-
Absolutely not.
No, yeah, it does not.
No, we because of our status, our rural status, we can go to USDA as many times as we need to, and they already know that we're going to be coming to them probably for more projects. So, and we've had they've been very happy with us. Matter of fact, they're going to be coming here in June with all of their USDA people to show off this project. So.
Well, and if I could just add, because this is a revenue bond, it's self-liquidating. In other words, it pays for itself, and therefore it doesn't count against your credit rating.
Right, yeah. Where a general obligation bond, you have 10% of your taxable value that you can levy on, that you can bond, which that doesn't impact us at all. And even if our general obligation debt is in compared to what we have is relatively low. I think we have about $5 million on general obligation debt between the city hall building
and the Broadway project, and I believe we have like another $12 million of debt limit there if we ever needed it.
Good.
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 All right. So Warren Kramer is here on Zoom with you tonight. He is our financial advisor. He does all of our rate analysis for us. We also utilize Michigan Rural Water, but for revenue bonding purposes, we have to use a financial advisor. Warren has represented the city for many years, and he's here to walk you through the different options of funding for this, or different rate options that you could consider. So Warren, where do you want to start?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for your faithful dispensation and letting me not attend tonight's meeting. As Mike said, we've worked with you for a long time. We're very grateful to be working with you, and tonight was a meeting that I hope to have attended. Unfortunately, I had cataract surgeries, and they partially fixed both of my eyes, but unfortunately, the new glasses that I ordered 2 weeks ago tomorrow have not yet come in. Apparently, my eyes are so screwed up, they had to outsource it to another lab. And basically, you guys, I simply can't drive at this point. So when you see me doing crazy things like shutting my eye and moving my head close to the computer, that's so I can see what we're talking about. But again, my sincerest apologies. I hope to be there this evening, and I'm grateful for the opportunity at least to join you by Zoom. So thank you. I said in preparation for today's meeting, I sent Sue to Mike 2 files. One was dated 4/1/24, the other is dated 3/25/24. I cleaned up some changes. I found a very, very small error, and I ran essentially 2 scenarios. And one scenario was with the township absorbing part of the rate increase. The other scenario was the township didn't absorb any of these additional costs in their rates. And Mike reminded me that these are city-specific costs, not integrated costs. So the file that I want to point you to this evening is dated March 25th of 24. There's been a lot of work done on it. Frankly, I should have changed the file name, but that was just easy for me to keep track of. And in that file, there are 4 tabs. Mike and I started talking about this quite some time ago. And would you like Mike to start with water or with sewer?
Why don't we start with water?
Okay.
Jim has a question.
Sure.
So,
Hang on, Jim has a question.
The information we're going to get tonight is going to also determine paying back to Washington Street, why these rate increases are happening.
Yes, you're
And
waiting.
also the Monroe, because we haven't rolled that, we haven't.
No, Monroe's included.
Monroe's included in this.
Correct.
Okay.
The only thing that the Monroe wasn't originally included was the first year's, was this current year's budget, which we've corrected.
Okay, no, I just want to understand this.
Yep,
These rate
sure.
increases are for that and
Correct.
general.
Yeah, we have not done, with anything pertaining to the township developments, we have not addressed that yet.
Okay.
That is not part of this conversation tonight.
Yep, I'm good.
that is correct.
Yep.
Yeah, let's start with the water. We can start with the one where we didn't control the rates.
Okay, so let's look at that first tab. It says water 5% 2025. Mike was provided me with a list of capital improvements to the system, and we included those in the funding requirements for the system. And Mike said, hey, just for discussion, let's just take a look. If we raise rates 5% to 25, what will be the subsequent rate impact of this financing in addition to the capital improvements? So that's what we did. Now, this one-page spreadsheet, there's actually kind of a lot going on. And the first big picture view is what happens beyond the 25 budget, fiscal year-end budget. And that assumes, like, you increased rates to city users of the system by 5%. And then what happens if you don't raise rates? You just leave rates at projected 25 or budgeted 25 levels. And it stays at that $1.4 million. Now, Mike, I'm looking at line 12.
Okay. Yeah, just tell me what line you're looking at so I can scroll for you.
Okay, great. So I'm looking at line 12. So the budgeted numbers include Mike's 5% increase on city rates. And assuming rates don't change and expenses grow at 3% annually, what happens to dollars available for funding requirements and debt service? And those funding requirements would be pay-go capital improvements or the USDA debt service reserve funding requirements or the RRI funding requirements, which are part of the letter of conditions for the USDA financing. So if you go down to lines 21 and 23, you can see that operating expenses, assuming a reasonable inflation rate, go up pretty significantly. But you can also see, when you look at operating income, you can also see those revenues that were budgeted for 24 and 25 start to decrease and go negative. And that's simply because you're holding revenues constant at 25, fiscal year end 25 levels, and you're growing expenses at 3% a year. So we're adding back in interest earned, which is technically a non-operating revenue. But then we say, okay, you guys, what needs to happen to rates if we simply leave things as they are? And if you go down to lines 41 to 49, those show what the funding requirements are. And we manually input it. So for fiscal year end 25, you have $166,900 of funding requirements. This includes debt service on the 2016 bonds, 2023 bonds, projected debt service on the 24A bonds, and the USDA bond reserve requirements set aside. Now, the city's budget is a little bit different. We're showing this more in an audit format than we are on a budget format. But in order to make things balanced for fiscal year end 25, we had to assume on line 24, column AH, that we had a contribution of funds on hand totaling $41,842. Again, that is line 34, column AH. So with that contribution of funds on hand, we have enough revenue available for, debt service, repair and replacement, pay-go capital, and it actually equals our funding requirements. So our debt service coverage ratio, or our funding requirement ratio, would be exactly 1 times, does our revenue equal our funding requirements after OM&R? Now at the bottom, we're keeping track of what's required to increase rates in an amount sufficient to meet the above funding requirements. So if you look at fiscal year end 2026, and again, assuming no change in 25 revenues, this little formula calculates what's necessary to fund OM&R, pay-go capital, your USDA funding requirements, to achieve 1.05 times coverage. So that means the monies available after the payment of OM&R equal 105% of the funding requirements. And we built in that little 5% cushion to address the consumption variable, because you never really know how much, people are going to consume. A lot of, as you know, is weather dependent, and if it's not a separate irrigation meter, weather will certainly impact both water and sewer revenues. So if we were going to increase rates by 35.37%, we would meet all of the funding requirements for projected 2026, and we would have $23,000 left over. And that, of course, would reduce, the negative 41,842 that we used in the previous year to get us to, 105 coverage. Now you have to remember, these rate increases are cumulative. The real hump is in fiscal year end 2026, when the debt service requirements of the USDA Series A bonds kick in, as well as the capital improvements that Mike has budgeted in the amount of $278,428. So in order to meet OM&R and the funding requirements that are currently projected for 2026, you'd have to raise rates 35.37%. Mike said for it, that's not going to work. So what options do we have? So if you look at line 57, you can see the rate increases that are necessary over that 5-year period of time to address the funding requirements. And you're looking at essentially a 58% increase over that 5-year period. Again, that's 26 through 30. So Mike said, that's going to be very, very hard to swallow. He said, Warren, how about if we smoothed it out? What if we took that 58% increase and divided that over the next 5 years? What would it look like? So, and actually in 6 years, I apologize. He said, if we let's just say we didn't raise rates 5% in 25, we raised it over a 6-year period. So if you take a look at that 58% and go to the next tab, Mike. Optically, we wanted to keep it under double digits. So if you take a look at row 9, starting in 24 to 25, and you increased rates at 1.0966%. And that's essentially taking the revenue requirements from that previous tab and spreading them out over that 25 fiscal year end period. Now, we actually have, as you can see, some coverage in 24, 25. In order to smooth it out the way we did, we still have to use some funds on hand. This is line 34, Mike.
Line 34.
We still have to use some funds on hand in 26, and that really addresses the larger capital improvement that Mike had budgeted in for fiscal year end 26. So when we use those funds on hand, you can see we generate cash, a little bit of coverage in 25. We've got that big capital improvement in fiscal year end 26. So you can see we go negative again. And then we have sufficient dollars in 2027 based on that 9.66% increase over that 6-year period. You can see we start to generate cash again. And our coverage, as a result, goes up. But we have more capital improvements. Go back to line 46, Mike. We have more capital improvements, not only budgeted in 27, but also in 29, and a significant amount budgeted in 2030. So over that 6-year period, we do have to use $214,000 of fund balance to smooth things out in 2026. But all of the things being equal, we're generating cash, we're accumulating cash again, and we end up in a $300,000 favorable cash position. And there's different things you can do. One is lower the rate increases. You're going to use more fund balance to smooth things out. But again, the goal was, to avoid, the double-digit sticker shock that would have been required had we only raised rates 5% for fiscal year end 25. And in that case, in fiscal year end 25, had you raised the rates the full amount necessary, you get the compounding effect. Again, the goal here was to smooth out the avoid the double-digit rate increases and smooth out the subsequent year rate increases. Now, it's important to remember that, when we start talking about partnering with the township, these numbers are going to change. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how those negotiations will turn out. So we have to look at it independently of the township project for tonight's purposes. So that's really the water system right now. And if you go back to tab 5% 25, I shared with you that those rate increases that are projected to be made in order to meet 105 coverage are cumulative. And, because of the capital expenditures, the big increase is in 26, and that would have necessitated essentially a 35% rate increase. But look at the end of 2030, we have a positive cash position of $358,000. Now, if you go back to the second tab, which is the 9.66% rate increase over the next 6 years or 5 years, including 25, our cash position is about $299,000. So, we're different by about 60 grand. But, there is cost associated with smoothing out the rates and meeting your capital pay-go requirements. So, this scenario got us to accept essentially the same place, that those larger, earlier rate increases would have gotten us to. But this, again, the goal was to make it more palatable for the users and spread out the cost of those, needed capital improvements.
So just to kind of chime in real quick, what this looks like to the residential customer, which is the 5/8 meter customer, which is 95% of our system. Over the 6-year period, the ready to serve for the first year, for June 1st, if we just did the 5% and did for the first year, would be $1.34 on the ready to serve increase and 13 cents on the commodity, the consumption charge. In 25-26, it's an additional $9.99, and then an additional 97 cents on the commodity. In 26 and 27 and 27 and 28, there's no rate increase if you do it that way. In 28, 29, there's an 84-cent increase to the ready to serve and an 8-cent increase on the commodity. And then in 29, 30, there's a $6.03 increase on the ready to serve and a 59-cent increase on the commodity. The 6-year average is a $3.03 increase annually on the ready to serve, and a 30-cent increase to the consumption. That's the 6-year average. That's if we don't spread it over time. Now, if we go with the set amount annually for the next 6 years, your ready to serve and your consumptions are the following. For the upcoming fiscal year, the increase on the ready to serve will be $2.60 and 25 cents on the commodity consumption. In 25-26, your increase will be $2.85 and 28 cents on the consumption. 26-27, $3.12 on the ready to serve and 30 cents on the consumption. 27-28, $3.42 on the ready to serve, and then an additional 33 cents on the consumption. 28-29, $3.75 increase to the ready to serve, and 37 cents on the consumption. In 29-30, an additional $4.12 and 40 cents on the consumption. So the 3-year average under option B is a $3.31 increase annually on the ready to serve and a 32-cent increase annually on the consumption. So that's how the rates break out. So if you want to move forward, we just need direction on which way you'd want to go.
And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but over time, the cumulative rate increases over that period of time between the two scenarios are slightly less if we made the big increase in 26 fiscal year end. But over that through 2030, the rate increases of the two scenarios essentially the same.
Correct.
Slightly higher with the smoothing effect.
Right. And just something to remember, I mean, like every year, we've had positive cash flow revenue over expenditures every year. We may not this year, but because of the Monroe project, but every year since I've been city manager and mind you, this on the water end, we've had significant So it's not like we're wasting money or there's any mismanagement of funds, it's just, this is the cost. I mean, I went through our budget just to make sure we weren't overspending or anything like that, and I couldn't find it, so.
No, I mean, clearly the system has been, very, very well managed. You're being proactive, you're taking necessary steps to preserve the integrity of the assets and ensure long-term reliability. People are often, reluctant to raise rates when the initial investment utilities were made. Maybe they lasted a long time. You've got a lot of people benefiting from those early investments, without keeping pace with inflation. This has happened, throughout, the country. We're at a point where infrastructure, really needs to be, replaced. And it's very simply a pay me now or pay me later situation. These costs don't go away, they simply get larger. And so the steps that you're taking now, I think are very, very prudent. And the way that you're financing them ensures that, people in the future that are benefiting from these improvements that you're financing now also pay for them now and later. So it's basically a way to share costs of the infrastructure, that you're financing.
And just something to add too, I did a 20-year history on our rates. What was recommended to us annually, either through Michigan Rural Water, the SAW grant, or through Warren's. And for the water, for many years, we were not following our recommendations. We weren't accommodating the rate structure the way it should have been. The wastewater was actually a little closer, but the significant thing in the wastewater is we probably lost about 20 to 30% flow for about 3 years due to the loss of revenue at Lighthouse. So those are things that we need to, just be mindful of.
And for the reason Mike just mentioned, that's why it's helpful to build in coverage. And I just want to point out, because I'm sure some of you have already noticed, under the first tab, we show you what the annual increases are for 105 coverage. In the second scenario, I changed it to 1 times coverage because I built in the rate increase manually, and we used fund balance to help smooth, and I didn't want to use more fund balance than I had to. But you'll notice in 27, we generate $678 in cash, so we did a 3% increase in expenses and pay-go capital. But if you take a look, you have in 28, you don't have that same pay-go capital. So your coverage jumps up, you generate significant excess cash, which you back in a positive cash position. In fiscal year end 29, our pay-go capital jumps back up to $189,000, but because of the steps taken previously, we're still generating positive cash. And even with $377,000 in pay-go capital in fiscal year end 30, again, you're still generating positive cash, but your coverage is actually going down. So, in a perfect world going forward, once the capital improvements stabilize, a wise practice would be to, at a minimum, increase rates and charges annually to cover inflationary costs.
Warren, if I'm reading your table correctly, the goal of the total debt service ratio, that needs to be 1.05, correct?
Mike, I apologize, you're gonna.
Sure,
have
the
to
question is the goal for the, based off the cash flow, is that the goal is to have 1.05 debt ratio coverage.
But you have to remember, it's a little bit beyond just debt service. It factors in, when you scroll up like lines 41 to 49, these are all of our funding requirements. And when the city closed on its 2023 USDA water bonds, there was a bond reserve requirement of 5480, and that goes for 10 years. And that amount will increase with the new debt that will show up in fiscal year end 25. But the USDA repair and replacement is an ongoing requirement of USDA. Now, the reason that you don't see it in 24 and 25 is because a lot of repair and replacement, in fact, in excess of that $17,000, is already included in the budgets for 24 and 25.
You have repair and replacement every year in your budget, so I want to take that amount, when I footnote in your budget, I'm gonna footnote to the RRI in your budgets going forward.
Right, but Mike, the city has been spending a lot of money, just looking at 24 and 25, the city's been spending a lot of money on repair and replacement.
Correct.
Now, USDA doesn't require you to accumulate that money like it does for the bond reserve account. They just want to know that you're actually spending that money to address basically kind of the short-term, short-lived assets that are repaired most frequently. And they came up with a number of $17,398, and all I know is in 24 and 25, and I don't have the budget pulled out in front of me, I couldn't see it anyway, I'd have to put up on my wife's cheaters right here. But you spent a lot more than $17,000 in 24 and 25 for repair and replacement.
Correct.
So again, that's a prudent practice.
The reason I ask my question is because if we don't make any rate increases, all this data shows me that we're going to be negative 0.1, where I think we want to be 1.05. If we don't do any changes, we're going to be negative 0.1. If we do the 9.6% a year, that gets us to 1.0. But I'm just curious, so in 2028, you see this 2.34, 1.44. So to me, I don't understand this as well as you do, but it looks like we're taking in too much money.
No, you're not. It's because you're changing your capital expenditures. That's what's really driving those rate increases.
You have other capital expenses that are accounted for in this. If you look at that master list I gave you of we got projects in there till 2040 that are in there. So what's driving it those years is we didn't do capital. We have no capital projects in 28. So that's why you have that high rate. Basically, the first 2 years, like this year, all the capital is going to be paid for cash